us to begin with a conversation right here in studio. And joining me right now is Salim Odeni, who's a governance expert. And of course, we will be talking about Mashujaa celebrations. Thank you so much, Salim, for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Betty.
All right. So first of all, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the celebrations being held in Machakos County.
I think first to begin, Betty, I support the idea of the president moving with this celebration, the national celebrations across the country. And now taking it to Machakos, I think is a positive and a bold move that is even taking this kind of celebration closer to the people so that ordinary Kenyans would have a feeling of what it is to have these national celebrations rather than concentrating all of them at Nairobi City.
But there are people who are saying, why not have them in somewhere far-flung like Turkana or, you know, somewhere that is not as modern? Because Machakos is just a few kilometers away from Nairobi. There's not too much of a big difference.
Definitely, that remains a challenge in terms of where they should be held. And also, but I think this is an idea that was an afterthought to the Jubilee administration because it's coming too late in the day. And I would agree with the proponents that say that actually it should be taken to the far-flung counties like Turkana, maybe hold it in Kwale, go with it to Busia, far away from the headquarters.
All right. Yeah. Okay, so let's also talk about some of the things that have been happening, and especially this week. Of course, we had the governance summit that was taking place in State House, and we'll be speaking shortly also to Irungu Horton, hoping he's going to join us here. But, I mean, there's a lot of things that came out even as we celebrate Mashujaa Day. President Uhuru Kenyatta, and, you know, people have been talking about his reaction towards, you know, fighting graft here in the country, that, you know, there are many names that have been tagged to him after that, you know, statement or address that he made. Coming from a governance point of view, being a governance expert, what do you think of the statement or address that he gave in regards to graft, saying that, you know, he's done what he can do? What do we expect more of him?
I think from my view, it is quite pathetic, to say the least, that the president would get so much frustrated to an extent that he would tell the whole nation, throwing his arms on the air, that he has nothing else to do, and even invoking the name of God that, now what do you expect me to do? And that actually demonstrated his helplessness with regard to addressing the graft. And looking at the promises that he made to this country before he became the president, one of the issues was actually fighting corruption, that he would have zero tolerance to corruption. But apparently now, when there was this accountability and governance summit at State House, when we see him actually throwing up his hands and saying that he has nothing else to do, then it means that Kenyans are left on their own. And I mean, we have to look elsewhere to fight corruption.
I mean, being an activist also, I mean, there were reactions from people, but I mean, the president said that, you know, it's actually the agencies, the institutions that are supposed to support this this fight that are letting this whole, you know, process down. He mentioned that, you know, he even, you know, talked to the AEACC, you know, head, saying that, you know, you gave me a list, I went to Parliament, you know, put out this list, but there's nothing tangible to show. So is it really his fault that, you know, we're not seeing prosecutions taking place? Or is it just that the agencies that are tasked to do this job are not doing the right thing?
I think my response to that would be like, it is not lost on us that the presidency, the institution of the presidency, and actually the administration of Jubilee has frustrated the fight against corruption. Even when he talks about the EACC, we remember last year when he submitted a list of names to Parliament, of a list of shame of people that were allegedly involved in corrupt practices. We remember that the EACC advised him that that list was not fully prepared, that he ought to have waited a little bit so that the list is concluded. But he ended up submitting the same list to Parliament. What that demonstrated to me is that it was just a mere attempt to demonstrate to the members of the public that he has actually committed to fight graft, when in real sense he was not doing that. Take an example, his response to the Auditor General. Auditor General has always submitted reports that speak against the administration in terms of misappropriation of funds, in terms of utilization of public resources. But now he says that the Auditor General is trying to play politics with the whole issue of corruption.
Is it a political? Because he, and I quote him him. He said it's a political circus, you know, this whole conversation about graft, you know, being used against him and his government, that it is indeed a political circus. Do you think it's a political circus? Because he went on and sarcastically, you know, talked about the Eurobond, you know, how possible is it that, you know, Kenya was colluding with the Federal Reserve Bank to, you know, use or keep the Eurobond money?
I wouldn't say it is political. I would say that almost each and every Kenyan is aware that corruption is real, and corruption stands out as one of the greatest challenges of this country. And that's why the president, before he became the president, he actually undertook to fight corruption. So when there are these agencies that are put in place to fight corruption, and again he turns against them and say that there is some political circus that is going on, I don't trust him on that. But even taking this a little bit further, I also don't believe in setting up these institutions, like some of these institutions, like EACC itself. I think EACC has become moribund, it's ineffective, it doesn't serve its purpose, and it doesn't need to be there, because all the offenses that we are talking about can actually be charged by the agencies that are available. We have the DPP, we have the DCI, we have the police. Why do we still create another institution that will only be cleansing the corrupt politicians and the corrupt individuals in this country? So for me, the EACC does not serve any purpose. It has become ineffective and quite moribund, and therefore the sooner we disband it, or even if not disband it, but to a kind of
not really heavily
restructure it, restructure it so that it is given a new mandate. But to fight corruption, no, it won't do that.
All right, let's also talk about the judiciary, because that was another, because you see that the governance summit was sort of like a blame game for different institutions that were represented there, and the judiciary was faulted even by the president, but that they take too long to prosecute and deliver judgments on some of these corruption cases. And yesterday, during the swearing-in ceremony of the newly installed Chief Justice, President Uhuru Kenyatta said that he's giving him a set of time for him to expedite 600 corruption cases. Do you think really the judiciary is the problem? Because at the end of the day, when you speak to lawyers, they say that, you know, the Constitution, the law is the law. If somebody, you know, deserves an injunction, or a case deserves an injunction or a bail, I mean, you cannot really say, you know, you will not give somebody a bail because it's a corruption case. The law really has to be followed.
I wouldn't want to blame judiciary per se, because, you know, courts address themselves and make pronouncements based on the facts and evidence that is adduced before them.
Right.
I think the prosecution equally has a serious blame to carry, in terms of how they present these corruption cases and how they take them to court. You remember, even from all the time we've been told about the big fishes that will be taken to court. And then we don't see that. And majority of the people who are committing these economic crimes and involved in corrupt practices are from the political class. And some of them are very close to the administration or the political regime that is in place right now. So when the government of the day is not cooperating in terms of bringing the people that are close to it to book, so that they are being taken to court, I think it is really fallacy to blame the judiciary.
All right. I want us to bring in Irungu Horton, who's joining me from our City Center studio. He is the Associate Director of the Society for International Development. And very interestingly, he was there during the Governance Summit. Irungu, thank you so much for joining us, and happy Mashujaa Day to you. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. I mean, you were there, you know, at State House the other day, and the president even at some point, you know, asked you, what do you want him to do?
Thank you very much, Betty, and very happy Mashujaa Day to everybody in Kenya. I was definitely there at the State House Summit, and at some point, you know, I also felt the frustration and the collective helplessness in the room with regards to this cancer of corruption. I did come away with a sense of hope, and there were probably three things that were important for us as Kenyans to recognize. First of all is that we now have the beginnings of a multi-agency approach to fighting corruption. The intention is there. It's a stated intention. We obviously can be very frustrated by the speed at which cases are going through courts, or the quality of the prosecution that's happening in some cases. I was particularly impressed by the interventions of the Asset Recovery Center director, who spoke very intelligently about how we could go after essentially what she calls unexplainable assets. So I think as we mark Mashujaa Day, we don't have, I think we can be constantly concerned about the fight against corruption, that we may be losing it, but I don't think we should lose the will to fight corruption. If I can, Betty, just to talk about, I was told that I was coming to talk about Shujaas, and I think if you give me a minute or so just to recreate, I think one of the things that has struck me as we approach this particular day is we spend a lot of time talking about the heroes and the sheroes, the historical patriots of our country, but we spend very little time talking about the everyday Shujaas. And if we just talked about, who's really impressed us, inspired us, standing inside of our constitutional vision over the last 365 days, I probably would need a whole show to go through them. But here's a couple for me,
Yes.
I think, I was very inspired by, the attempts to cap interest rates. The parliamentarians came out and did that. The cabinet also has now waived all surveying fees for public education institutions. That means that all the schools that are at threat of being grabbed are now can now be surveyed and titled as per the presidential directive. I think also we can be thankful for the departure of Willie Mutunga as the Chief Justice. He left that office without a single scandal to his name. He stepped down before his time. And he has left a legacy, I think, that CJ Maraga can take forward. And I think he, for me, would be one of the Shujaas. But there are many. I mean, if you think about all the people who struggle for decent housing, the people we saw in Huruma during the recent catastrophe, the Makonde that marched all the way from Kwale to Nairobi and finally got to meet the president, and their simple request just to be part of this nation. They are my Mashujaa. The Rio sportsmen and women who stepped through the corruption and the sleaze that was happening in Rio to go ahead and win gold medals and represent us. I think those are my Mashujaa. The head teachers from Wamdudu and from Naka Primary School who continue to protect their school against land grabbers. Those are our Shujaa. I could go on. I mean, there are just a lot of people that are out there that are doing just wonderful work. I mean, we even have residents who, every night they're not able to sleep at night because there are noisy nightclubs or churches or places of worship, and they continue to fight against that. Those are our Shujaa. So there are everyday Shujaa, and I think what we need to do on a day like this is to be thinking about how are we creating the conditions, how are we supporting people to really live in the spirit of the Mau Mau, of the Wangari Maathais, of the Mekate Lilies, all these people that have inspired us historically. But the greatest thing is we have Shujaa among us today.
All right. It's interesting that you say that, and I like that you've mentioned some of the people who really are doing, the society proud and Kenya proud. Do you think that we are too engrossed in the days, politics and everything that's happening that we actually forget to mention such people that you are talking about?
I mean, I think Kenyans forget that the definition of politics is really about power and public resources. And if you're not having a conversation about power and public resources, that's not politics. That's simply politricks. It's personality games that really have a place only on a reality show, but not really something that inspires us to be bigger than we are as a nation. And I think we can look for heroes among us. We remember the young girl Mwende who had her arms cut off, and long after the newspapers and the media captured her story, she went on to get assistance from from companies to actually get artificial limbs put in, and she continues to build her life and to go on with that. Or take the people with disabilities who walk across who try to go across our streets and have no pavements, and every day they get up and do that. Or the women who are raped and then have to go through the double victim exercise of trying to get a P3 form. Those are our Shujaas. All
right. Let me bring in Salim. I mean, Salim, do you feel, like Irungu Horton, of course, mentioning some of the people who've really been at the forefront of great things in the country, that, we need to celebrate them a bit more? At least yesterday in State House, we saw the president honoring the athletes who took part in the Rio Olympics. Do you think we need to see more of that? And, of course, as we have the different conversations that are also still important to do with corruption and everything else.
I want to agree with Irungu that we are actually having these celebrations when the country is stricken with poverty, with a drought, and people dying out of hunger. and there are Kenyans who are struggling out there to have that spirit of resilience to outmaneuver all the things that they are actually facing. I think when we look at the whole question of heroes or Mashujaa, we need to go beyond the political class so that we keep on talking about the politicians that as Mashujaas.
Right.
I would also agree with him in recognizing the Makonde community led by Mzee Thomas Nguli that trekked all the way from Kwale to the State House. But again, the question would be, must Kenyans trek all the way to the State House for them to be granted what is their birthright as citizens? So I would agree with him. There are people who are doing a lot of things at the grassroots level or wherever level they're contributing. Those are entrepreneurs, the people who are trying to contribute to improve the lives of others. Because Shujaa is not about what you do for yourself, but the sacrifices, the resilience against the odds that you face, and then you do something to improve other people's lives.
Okay.
And I think that cadre needs to be opened even, to be widened even further.
All right. I want you to comment on something that Irungu said when he was commenting about the governance summit that took place earlier this week. And he said that while he was at State House, he felt some level of collective helplessness in dealing really with graft. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, because President Uhuru Kenyatta said that today he's actually going to have, petty offenders released so that they make space for, the real, the big fish, as we like to call them.
I began by saying that that's what almost everybody observed during that summit, that there was a sense of helplessness, there was a sense of frustration that was actually demonstrated by the president and almost everybody that was there. And that is what allowed that blame game to begin, because nobody was prepared to take the bull by its horns, because they felt helpless on the face of graft.
Right.
And I said that at the beginning, and I agree with him. I just hope that in Machakos today, President shall have found the response to his question that he asked the Kenyans, that what do you want me to do?
What do you want me to do?
I think he has slept over it, and maybe now he would realize that Kenyans elected him to deliver services. The Kenyans elected him to lead the way, even in the fight against the graft.
Okay.
So when he comes back to us and tells us, what do you want me to do? I think that was a bad question, but he must have thought about it. And we will listen to him in Machakos. Perhaps he would tell us now what he has thought about.
What he's thought about.
Yeah.
Irungu, I don't know what your thoughts are about what we're expecting President Uhuru Kenyatta, of course, to talk about. Are we expecting that he's going to go back to that important conversation about fighting graft? Because it still hangs, very, very heavy on very many Kenyans' minds. What he's said is something that we'll not probably forget for some time. I mean, are we expecting that he's going to talk about it again and maybe put the record straight on exactly, what he's going to do as a president?
I think the narrative of fighting corruption will not disappear before the next elections. I think that's clear for me. I think it should not be underestimated. I think the opposition, if they do seriously contemplate taking power in the next election, they need to be thinking beyond what the president and the cabinet are currently doing. They need to be thinking about what would be a more effective way of dealing with grand-scale corruption. I was sitting in State House the other day, and I was thinking, if I was a member of the sugar, wheat, or land cartels in this country that simply believe that everything that belongs to the public is theirs, how would I have seen the conversation? And I don't think, to be honest, they would have been feeling very comfortable with that conversation, because in that room was probably about 160 people with a lot of government departments, the business sector, the religious community, the non-governmental organizations, and all those people that were in that room really present a potential power that, if unleashed and focused, could be a decisive blow to the corruption that we see in this country. So I think, if I was sitting there as a corrupt tenderpreneur, I wouldn't have been that comfortable with that conversation. So I think as we talk about the collective helplessness, I think we need to think also from the perspective of those people who spend 24 hours scheming how to steal what I think John Gedongo calls the pirate sector, not the private sector.
All right.
That we need to have them also put on their defense and see a sense of discomfort that does not allow them to sleep well at night either.
But then there's also the other thing about us being, Kenyan citizens. I'm sure you heard the matatu driver, during the summit saying that, he usually has to give bribes to the police at some point, along Jogoo Road. And I don't know what your feeling about that is, because it means that, it's just not at the top, but it starts from, at the level that we are at as citizens of this country.
Those 15 minutes, Betty, for me, were probably the reality of Kenya. You have somebody who is basically trying to make a living, trying to grow his business, face to face with the weight of our security services, essentially just preying on his business. And then you have the Inspector General essentially being unable to really reassure this person that actually this is an offense to the policy, the rules and procedures of the police service. And then you also have the chairperson of IPOA, who also is reassuring the person that actually should he be arrested for speaking the truth to power, that he would be protected. And I think that, for me, was a really powerful moment in terms of where we've reached. It's also a moment we can be proud of, because 5 to 10 years ago, we may not have seen a matatu owner be so courageous. We may not have seen a space on national television in the State House discussing such an issue. So I think we need to be happy that we have at least moved into that space. The only thing that we would ask now is really for a sea of reforms that allow for the police service to respond to what is essentially a plea by the matatu industry that they would comply with the law. They were prepared to go to court, but can they make it easy for them so that they don't destroy their businesses and are left with no other option but to bribe? And I think we can see that in all the other sectors. But I think that, for me, was one of probably the most powerful moments of this year.
All right. Salim, I'd like to hear your thoughts on President Uhuru Kenyatta saying that he is the first president to tackle graft in the country head-on. What is your feeling about? Should we cut him some slack? At least he began the process.
I think that I don't know whether to call it a political statement, because that's not true, and he also knows that that's not true, because you can do a very quick audit of the people who've been alleged to have involved themselves in corrupt practices. What does he do with these people, especially those who are in his inner circle? He doesn't talk about it. We can see what happened in the NYS saga, the SGR, alongside other allegations that have been made about corruption. Instead, most of these people have always been rewarded by the president and being recognized as people who are fighting for the nation. So when he says that he's the first president who is actually taking graft head-on, I don't really take him serious.
But Anne Waiguru, is no longer the CS for devolution, among other, people who have been implicated. But
she's a life member of the president's party, and then she's going to run on the same party as a governor. If the president is very serious, he would say, no, that can never work. In serious countries, serious democracies, then the president would say, no, you are already tainted. Go and clear your name first. But that never happens. And that gets me back to the question you're asking about who are these other people that can be recognized in terms of Mashujaa.
Yes.
You see, there are these people who are not in the state, the non-state actors, the activists, the people who are from the civil society organizations who are telling the state the truth. Instead of persecuting and prosecuting them, I think the state has the duty to parachuting them to honor by awarding them this kind of recognition. People like Irungu himself, people like Koiti Okiomtata, Boniface Mwangi, alongside other people, Cyprian Nyamwamu, instead of persecuting them, because they're telling the state what the state is supposed to be doing. And instead of a state playing hide-and-seek games with them, we would also want to see their names. It must not be the people who are in the state sector.
Irungu, finally, I would like to hear your thoughts on it. Do you think that, the civil society should, of course, be honored as, the people who drive certain conversations here in the country?
I think I agree with Salim in many things that he says. I think it's, recognition is not requested, it is conferred. There is nothing that Boniface Mwangi does, or any of the people that have been mentioned here, that they do this in order to be recognized. I think what the best recognition really would be that the things that they point out, the things that they research and bring to the government's attention, that those things are acted on. Every year we acknowledge and recognize people. We give them Elders of the Burning Spear. I think one of the challenges, you asked me, what would you like the president to do? I think for me, given his stated commitment to fighting corruption, could we see 10 or 15 whistleblowers, both within government and outside of government, being recognized and made Elders of the Burning Spear? We have too many people who are given those titles in very dubious with very dubious professional credentials. And I think I would also ask the president, why doesn't he strip some of the people, many of whom we've named already on this show and previous shows, why doesn't he strip them of those titles?
All right, interesting. Thank you so much, Irungu Houghton and Salim Odeni. Salim is a governance expert and Irungu Houghton is Associate Director of the Society for International Development, talking to us about a range of issues. And of course, this day that we're celebrating Mashujaa Day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.